Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, James Marcuzzo. It's week 9 of the KSS. We're going to talk about why globalization is good for you. Now, at the outset, let's acknowledge globalization can be a pain in the butt for everybody, depending on the circumstances, right? There are lots of benefits to globalization, lots, because it's the free market on the global scale. Lots of benefits, but there are some drawbacks, little ones. We won't talk about them right now. We'll talk about them in other articles. But wealthy countries with established economies will suffer a little bit from some globalization, and underdeveloped countries or poor countries will gain actually the majority of the benefits. But we all end up benefiting overall anyway. Globalization is not perfect. Some people complain about it, but overall, you can't stop it, one, and so let's just try to understand it. And we'll get to immigration, because that's part of globalization. In fact, we'll talk about it just right now, briefly. Third paragraph, page 1, immigration has also contributed significantly to economic growth and higher wages. Partly true. So, all immigrants are disproportionately represented in creating new jobs as opposed to the local population, right? So that's why immigrants are great for an economy. But different immigrants or immigrants from different countries have different impacts on wages. So we want people to create jobs no matter what. Okay. But immigrants from the South, specifically Mexico, Central America, and further, tend to, though not always, tend to have lower levels of education and skill sets. And that depresses wages. But it still creates jobs, and that's overall good. Immigrants from the East have a harder time getting here, so we get to pick and choose, and they end up having higher level academic degrees. They also tend to speak English more likely because they've been practicing, because they're highly educated, and especially in countries like Pakistan and India, English is already practiced there because of colonialization from back in the day, not us, the British. So, immigrants from those countries, right, the East, they come here and they create higher wage jobs in the STEM fields. That's good because they're jobs and they're high wage jobs. Great. Immigrants from the South create more jobs, but they're not usually high wage jobs, but they're still jobs and that's still good. So I want to make that distinction because some of you might wonder, does that make sense? If you know anything about the economy, that should be suspect. And they didn't explain that fully. Moving on. The rest of the article is actually nice and digestible. There's a special spot, highlights, whatever, titles they call it. Longer, healthier lives, right? Globalization brings education, brings knowledge, brings medicine, brings better health and hygiene practices. Women's liberation, that should be obvious. Women are huge winners in globalization. Countries can't long withstand the push for greater economic freedom and activity and liberalization of education, and women are the big winners there. And we see what it looks like in countries that try to repress that. Child labor goes down. Economic growth obviously grows with globalization because, again, we're talking about globalization specifically in a free market sense. If anyone, for any reason, doesn't think that free market capitalism, with maybe some minor restrictions, but overall free market capitalism is the single greatest concept that has brought people the world over out of poverty, you need to do some math on that. Because it is the greatest savior of humanity. Free markets. The ability for people to consensually engage in contracts and agreements. Higher incomes. Because if you're in a poor country or an undeveloped country, then any growth in the economy is going to bring higher incomes. Less poverty, kind of goes with the last one. More trees. So this is interesting. If you're poor, you are not sure about your survival. And so the range of things you're concerned about is very small, very myopic. But once you get to a range of about $3,000 to $5,000 income, right, per year, per capita, you start to look outside of yourself and go, well, I feel reasonably comfortable that I'm going to survive in the short term. What does my environment look like? And so one of the ideas that they express here is that we, as developed or countries, wherever you're from, we ought to engage with and encourage development industrially, technologically in other undeveloped countries so that they move past that dirty middle stage of industrialization and get to an income point where those individuals in those countries are concerned about the environment. I've heard that number, again, from 3,000 to 5,000, vary. So opposing development slows down eventual environmental improvement in poor countries. peace. Countries that trade, right? This is like a long-standing truism in international politics and in economics. Trade reduces the likelihood of violent conflict. China and the U.S. probably would have been at each other's throats long ago if not for the fact that we are economically interconnected. More productive workers. This is something called TFP, total factor productivity. Simple concept. If you take all the poor people from around the world that have very little to no access to technology or to production in their own societies because it doesn't exist there, and you put them right into societies like America, like U.S., Canada, any Western or Eastern technologically developed country, where it doesn't have to be West or East, but a technologically industrialized developed country, you take all those poor people and you put them into those places, their productivity, world productivity, exponentially increases. Makes sense, right? That's one reason why free market, very libertarian economists are in favor of open borders, right? They don't really care about the negative aspects that might come with open borders. What they're interested in is that we'll get better productivity because we'll get all the people and they'll come to the place where the most productivity can happen, and then they'll do that there, and we'll get way, way more stuff. And it's a compelling argument because the math works out that would happen that way. It's just that not everybody's on board with all the other things that might come from it. So yeah, that was real fast. That was pretty good. That's why globalization is good for us, and it is, I think, more or less. The drawbacks are few, and the benefits are many. We'll talk soon.